Today we are talking about one of the most iconic and entertaining action comedy films ever made. We are covering the 1998 blockbuster Rush Hour, a film that changed the landscape of Hollywood buddy cop movies forever and introduced the world to one of the greatest on-screen duos in cinema history. Whether you have seen this film 100 times or are hearing about it for the first time, this breakdown is going to cover every single detail you need to know. So let us get right into it. Overview. Rush Hour is a 1998 American buddy cop action comedy film. It was directed by Brett Ratner and written by Jim Cuff and Ross LaManna, based on an original story by LaManna. The film was produced by New Line Cinema and distributed under the same banner. It carries a PG-13 rating and has a runtime of approximately 97 minutes. The movie is an American production, but its story pulls together two very different cultural worlds, blending the high-energy martial arts tradition of Hong Kong cinema with the fast-talking, wisecracking style of American comedy. That combination is exactly what made this film feel so fresh and exciting when it arrived in theaters, and it is what continues to make it rewatchable even today. The film falls under multiple genres simultaneously. It is an action film, a comedy, and a crime thriller all wrapped into one tight and highly entertaining package. At its core, Rush Hour is about two men who are completely opposite in personality, background, and style being forced to work together under pressure. That friction between the two lead characters is what drives the humor, and the genuine danger of the situation they find themselves in is what drives the action. The balance between these two elements is handled with great skill, and the result is a film that never feels boring for even a single moment. The production of this film has an interesting backstory. Development began in 1995 when screenwriter Ross LaManna wrote a spec script. That script was initially sold to Hollywood Pictures, a division of Walt Disney Company, with director Brett Ratner and Jackie Chan already attached to the project. However, after more than a year of development, Disney put the project into turnaround, expressing concerns about the budget and Jackie Chan's crossover appeal to mainstream American audiences. Several other studios showed interest, and ultimately New Line Cinema stepped in and committed to the film fully. New Line already had a working relationship with both Brett Ratner and Chris Tucker from their collaboration on Money Talks in 1997, so the pieces came together quite naturally from that point forward. It is also worth noting that the casting of Chris Tucker as Detective James Carter was not a straightforward decision. Several major names were considered for the role before Tucker was chosen. Among those considered were Martin Lawrence, Wesley Snipes, Chris Rock, Eddie Murphy, Dave Chappelle, and even Tupac Shakur. Eddie Murphy reportedly turned down the role to appear in Holy Man instead, and Wesley Snipes passed on it in favor of Blade, which was also a New Line Cinema production. Jackie Chan himself had expressed a preference for Martin Lawrence, but that fell through due to contractual disagreements. Eventually Chris Tucker was brought on board, and as history has proven, that turned out to be the perfect decision. Plot details. The story begins in Hong Kong in 1997, on the very last day of British rule over the territory. Inspector Lee, a highly skilled and deeply respected detective with the Hong Kong police force, leads a raid on a shipping wharf in an effort to arrest a powerful and mysterious crime lord known only as Hun Tao. The raid is partially successful. Lee and his team recover a large collection of priceless Chinese cultural artifacts that had been stolen by Hun Tao's criminal organization. However, Hun Tao himself is never captured. Only his right-hand man, a dangerous operative named Sang, is encountered during the raid, and Sang manages to escape before Lee can apprehend him. Lee presents the recovered artifacts as a farewell gift to his departing superiors, including Chinese Consul Solon Han and British Commander Thomas Griffin, at a formal dinner. Consul Han is deeply grateful for Lee's work, and the two share a warm relationship. Han soon departs for Los Angeles, where he is set to take up a new diplomatic post. Accompanying him on this new chapter of his life is his beloved young daughter, Soo-young. Shortly after arriving in the United States, tragedy strikes. Soo-young is kidnapped on her very first day of school in Los Angeles. The kidnapping is orchestrated by Sang, acting on behalf of the still unseen Huntao, and the kidnappers demand a ransom of $50 million. Consul Han is devastated and immediately calls upon the one man he trusts above all others, Inspector Lee, to come to Los Angeles and help recover his daughter. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, we are introduced to Detective James Carter, a loud, confident, and entertainingly reckless LAPD officer who is convinced that he is on the verge of a major career breakthrough. Carter is conducting an undercover operation at a donut shop, attempting to buy C4 explosives from a criminal contact named Clive. The operation goes sideways when two uniformed officers arrive and blow his cover, leading to a chaotic chase that ends with Clive's car exploding. Carter escapes unharmed but has once again embarrassed his superiors, a recurring theme in his career. When Inspector Lee arrives in Los Angeles, the FBI takes over the kidnapping case and wants no interference from outside parties. To keep Lee out of their way, they assign Carter to babysit him, essentially tasking Carter with the job of distracting Lee and keeping him occupied. Carter is furious at this assignment, viewing it as another sign that his superiors do not take him seriously. Lee, for his part, has no intention of being kept away from the investigation that involves his oldest friend's daughter. What follows is a series of brilliantly comedic and increasingly intense encounters as Lee and Carter clash over their wildly different approaches to law enforcement. Lee is disciplined, precise, and deeply committed to the mission. Carter is improvisational, self-promotional, and constantly talking. Neither one respects or understands the other at first, and that dynamic produces some of the funniest scenes in the entire film. However, as the investigation pushes them deeper into danger, the two begin to develop genuine trust and mutual respect. Their investigation leads them through various corners of Los Angeles, including encounters with Carter's cousin and local contacts who provide information about the criminal underworld. They follow leads that take them increasingly closer to the truth behind the kidnapping. Along the way, a shocking revelation emerges. The mysterious crime lord Huntao is not some unknown figure operating in the shadows. He is actually a man known to both the FBI and the diplomatic community, operating under a false identity that has allowed him to move freely while orchestrating criminal activity on an international scale. The climax of the film takes place at a glamorous charity auction held at a large venue, where Huntao intends to collect his ransom money using the very stolen Chinese artifacts that Lee had previously recovered in Hong Kong. Lee and Carter infiltrate the event and a tense and explosive confrontation follows. Carter faces off against Sang in a brutal fight, while Lee pursues Huntao through the venue. The final confrontation between Lee and Huntao takes place high above the ground, with Soo-young's life hanging in the balance. Lee ultimately defeats Huntao, rescues Soo-young, and saves the day. Carter, having proven himself to be far more capable and loyal than anyone gave him credit for, earns the respect he has been seeking throughout the entire film. The two men, who started as reluctant and bickering partners, end the film as genuine friends and an unstoppable team. Cast. The cast of Rush Hour is one of its greatest strengths, and every major role is filled by a performer who brings something distinct and memorable to the screen. Jackie Chan plays Inspector Lee, the Hong Kong detective at the center of the story. Chan was already a massive star in Asia by the time this film was made, known around the world for his incredible physical abilities, his creative and dangerous stunt work, and his unique brand of martial arts comedy. Rush Hour was a significant moment in his career because it represented his genuine crossover into mainstream Hollywood stardom. Chan brings warmth, dignity, and extraordinary physicality to the role of Lee. He performs his own stunts throughout the film, including a breathtaking sequence where he leaps from a double-decker bus to an overhead traffic sign and then to a moving truck. Chris Tucker plays Detective James Carter, and his performance is an absolute force of nature. Tucker was known for his stand-up comedy and his role in Friday Before Rush Hour, but this film elevated him to a completely different level of stardom. His portrayal of Carter is loud, energetic, and endlessly funny, but Tucker also finds moments of genuine heart beneath all the bravado that make the character surprisingly likable and even touching at times. The contrast between his style and Jackie Chan's understated approach is the engine that drives the entire film. Tom Wilkinson plays the villain, who goes by the name Griffin but is secretly the crime lord Huntao. Wilkinson brings a cold, calculating menace to the role that gives the film a genuinely threatening antagonist. Ken Leung plays Sang, Huntao's ruthless right-hand man, and he is a convincing physical threat throughout the story. Sima plays Consul Han, the Chinese diplomat whose daughter is kidnapped, and whose friendship with Li provides the emotional foundation of the plot. Elizabeth Pena plays Detective Johnson, Carter's long-suffering partner at the LAPD who deals with his antics with considerable patience. Chris Penn plays Clive, the criminal contact who appears in the film's opening act. Julia Su plays Su Young, the kidnapped daughter, and the film wisely portrays her not as a helpless victim but as a spirited and capable young girl who gives her captors considerable trouble. Release date and box office. Rush Hour was officially released in the United States on September 18, 1998. It opened at number 1 at the North American box office during its opening weekend, earning an impressive $33 million in just its first 3 days of release. That opening was significant enough to surpass the previous record for the highest September opening weekend in Hollywood history, a record that had previously been held by the First Wives Club. It also became the biggest opening weekend in New Line Cinema's history at that time, surpassing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The film remained at the top of the box office for 2 consecutive weeks before being displaced by the animated film Mats. By the time its theatrical run was complete, Rush Hour had earned approximately $141 million in the United States and Canada alone, with an additional $104 million from international markets. The total worldwide gross came to approximately $245 million, making it the 7th highest grossing film of 1998. For a buddy cop comedy with a budget of around $33 million, that financial performance was extraordinary and far exceeded anyone's initial expectations. Trailer and reception. The trailer for Rush Hour was a masterclass in selling a film's core appeal in just a few minutes. It leaned heavily on the contrast between Lee and Carter, showcasing their clashing personalities, their physical comedy, and the spectacular action sequences that the film delivers. Audiences who saw the trailer immediately understood the premise, and were excited by the combination of Jackie Chan's martial arts brilliance and Chris Tucker's comedic energy. The trailer generated significant buzz and clearly played a major role in driving that massive opening weekend. Critical reception was largely positive. Reviewers praised the chemistry between Chan and Tucker as genuinely exceptional, noting that the two performers seemed to have a natural and effortless rapport that made every scene between them highly entertaining. The action sequences were widely praised, particularly the stunt work choreographed by Jackie Chan and his stunt team. Some critics noted that the screenplay itself was relatively straightforward and the plot was not particularly complex. But the general consensus was that the film delivered exactly what it promised, which was a wildly fun and highly entertaining experience from beginning to end. The film holds a strong reputation to this day as one of the definitive examples of the buddy cop genre. One interesting piece of trivia that is genuinely remarkable is that Rush Hour was the catalyst for the creation of the review aggregation website Rotten Tomatoes. The website's founder, Sen Duong, was a Jackie Chan fan who had been collecting reviews of Chan's Hong Kong films. In anticipation of Rush Hour as Chan's major Hollywood crossover moment, he built the website in 2 weeks and launched it shortly before the film's release. That means one of the most important websites in modern film criticism owes its very existence to this movie. The success of Rush Hour led directly to two sequels. Rush Hour 2 was released in 2001, and Rush Hour 3 followed in 2007. The franchise became one of New Line Cinema's most valuable properties and cemented Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker as one of the most beloved duos in Hollywood history. Rush Hour is the kind of film that reminds you why movies are such a powerful form of entertainment. It takes a simple premise, fills it with genuine talent, gives those talented people the freedom to create something joyful and exciting, and the result is something that audiences around the world fell in love with and continue to love more than 2 decades later. It is funny, it is thrilling, it is warm, and it is absolutely worth your time if you have never seen it, or if it has been a while since your last rewatch. Rush Hour, 1998, complete story in detail. The story of Rush Hour begins in Hong Kong in the year 1997, during one of the most historically significant moments in the region's modern history. This is the final day of British colonial rule over Hong Kong, a day that marks the handover of the territory back to China after more than 150 years under British governance. While the city is alive with the weight of this historic transition, one man is entirely focused on his job. That man is Detective Inspector Lee of the Hong Kong Police Force, one of the most skilled and dedicated law enforcement officers in the entire city. Lee has been tracking a powerful and elusive criminal organization for a long time. At the head of this organization is a mysterious and dangerous figure known by the name Hun Tao. Hun Tao is not just any criminal. He is a sophisticated and highly intelligent crime lord who has managed to operate in the shadows for years without ever being directly caught or identified. Among his many criminal activities, Hun Tao has been responsible for the theft of a vast collection of priceless Chinese cultural artifacts, ancient treasures of immense historical and monetary value that have been smuggled out of their rightful places and hidden away. On this final day of British rule, Lee leads a raid on a shipping wharf in Hong Kong where he believes Hun Tao's operation is based. The raid is tense and dangerous, with Lee and his team moving through the docks with precision and focus. During the operation, Lee comes face to face with Sang, a cold and highly capable man who serves as Hun Tao's most trusted lieutenant and right-hand enforcer. Sang is ruthless and efficient, and despite Lee's best efforts, Sang manages to slip away before he can be captured. Hun Tao himself is nowhere to be found. The crime lord remains a ghost, his true identity still unknown. However, the raid is not a complete failure. Lee and his team successfully recover the stolen Chinese artifacts, reclaiming the cultural treasures that Hun Tao's organization had taken. It is a meaningful victory, even if the main target escaped. That evening, Lee attends a formal farewell dinner hosted to mark the end of the British colonial period. At this dinner, he presents the recovered artifacts as a gesture of pride and accomplishment. Among the guests at this dinner are 2 important figures who will play significant roles in the story that follows. The first is Chinese Consul Solon Han, a distinguished diplomat who is preparing to take up a new posting in the United States, specifically in Los Angeles. The second is British Commander Thomas Griffin, a senior official who has been a presence in Hong Kong's colonial administration. Consul Han and Inspector Lee share a genuine and warm friendship that goes back many years. Han is deeply impressed and grateful for Lee's successful recovery of the artifacts, and the 2 men part on good terms as Han prepares to depart for America. Accompanying Han on his move to Los Angeles is his young daughter, Su Young, a bright and spirited girl who has grown up around Lee and who has even learned some basic martial arts under Lee's informal guidance. She is the most important person in Consul Han's world, and Lee cares for her like a member of his own family. Soon after Consul Han arrives in Los Angeles to begin his diplomatic duties, something terrible happens. On what should have been a perfectly ordinary morning, Su Young is taken from the street while being driven to her first day at her new school in America. The kidnapping is swift and organized, the work of professionals who clearly planned the operation in advance. The man behind the kidnapping is none other than Sang, who has followed Han to the United States on the orders of the still-hidden Juntao. A ransom demand is issued. The kidnappers want $50 million in exchange for Su Young's safe return. Consul Han is devastated. His daughter is everything to him, and he is now in a foreign country, surrounded by an unfamiliar law enforcement system, desperate for help he can trust. Han reaches out to the one person he knows he can count on completely, Inspector Lee. He calls Lee and asks him to come to Los Angeles to help find Su Young. For Lee, this is not even a question. He gets on a plane immediately. The connection between Lee and the Han family is deeply personal, and no amount of jurisdictional complications or bureaucratic obstacles is going to stop him from doing everything in his power to bring Su Young home safely. When the news of the kidnapping reaches the FBI, they immediately take control of the case. A kidnapping involving a foreign diplomat on American soil is a federal matter, and the FBI is not interested in sharing the investigation with anyone, least of all a foreign police officer who has flown in from Hong Kong. The FBI assigns a senior agent named Russ to lead the case, and Russ makes it very clear that he wants Lee kept as far away from the actual investigation as possible. He does not want Lee conducting his own inquiries, pulling on threads, or interfering with the FBI's approach in any way. To solve this problem, the FBI contacts the Los Angeles Police Department and asks them to assign an officer to keep Lee occupied and distracted for the duration of his stay. The LAPD assigns this babysitting duty to Detective James Carter. Carter is told that this assignment is a punishment, a meaningless task designed to sideline him, while the real police work happens elsewhere. And Carter is absolutely furious about it. Detective James Carter is a force of nature unlike anything the city of Los Angeles has ever seen, at least in his own mind. He is loud, confident, endlessly talkative, and utterly convinced of his own greatness. Carter has been working as an LAPD detective for a while now, but his career has been a series of near misses and self-inflicted disasters caused by his inability to follow orders or work within the established system. He is the kind of officer who always seems to be one good case away from the major recognition he craves, but somehow that recognition never quite arrives. He drives a black Corvette convertible, he has an enormous sense of personal style, and he speaks with the kind of rapid-fire confidence that makes it impossible to get a word in once he gets started. Just before being assigned the Lee babysitting job, Carter was in the middle of what he considered a major undercover operation. He was meeting with a low-level criminal contact named Clive, who was attempting to sell stolen C4 plastic explosive from the trunk of his car outside a donut shop. Carter was playing it cool, trying to complete the deal and get enough evidence to make an arrest, when two uniformed patrol officers pulled into the parking lot, noticed the suspicious activity, and blew Carter's cover entirely by drawing their weapons. The scene erupted into chaos. Clive panicked, opened fire on the officers, jumped into his car, and drove away at high speed with Carter chasing on foot and firing at the fleeing vehicle. Clive leaped from the moving car just before it slammed into something and exploded. Carter was uninjured, but the operation was a complete mess, and his superiors were not impressed. So when Carter arrives at the airport to pick up Inspector Lee, he is already in a terrible mood. He has been benched from real police work and assigned to play tour guide for a Chinese cop he has never heard of. Carter immediately makes his feelings known. He is not subtle about his irritation, and he has no intention of letting this polite and quietly determined man from Hong Kong interfere with anything important. Inspector Lee, for his part, arrives in Los Angeles with one thought on his mind. He is going to find Su Young and bring her home, and he is going to do it regardless of what the FBI says or what this LAPD officer assigned to watch him thinks. Lee is a man of quiet intensity. He is not a loud person. He does not boast or showboat. He observes everything around him with calm and careful attention, and beneath his gentle exterior is a man of extraordinary physical capability and iron determination. The first meeting between Lee and Carter is immediately and spectacularly awkward. Carter cannot understand Lee's heavily accented English very well, and Lee cannot understand Carter's lightning-fast, slang-heavy American speech at all. They stand in the arrivals hall of Los Angeles International Airport essentially talking past each other, either one willing to admit how little they understand. It is the first of many hilarious exchanges between two men who are operating on completely different frequencies. Carter takes Lee around Los Angeles, nominally showing him the sights while actually trying to keep him away from anything connected to the kidnapping investigation. But Lee is nobody's fool. He is constantly scanning his surroundings, quietly gathering information, and looking for any angle that might lead him closer to Soo-young. He keeps pushing to get access to the investigation, to speak with Consul Han, to be involved in something that actually matters, and Carter keeps trying to redirect him. The situation changes when Lee manages to slip away from Carter and make contact with the FBI agents working the kidnapping case. He tries to offer his expertise and his knowledge of Sang and Huntao's operation, but the FBI dismisses him and sends him away. Frustrated but undeterred, Lee starts pursuing the case on his own terms, and Carter, realizing that Lee is going to get himself into serious trouble if left unsupervised, has no choice but to follow along and try to keep up. This is where the real partnership begins to form, though not without considerable friction along the way. Carter takes Lee to a pool hall in a part of the city where he has connections, hoping to gather some street-level intelligence about the kidnapping. The visit turns into a wild confrontation when Carter inadvertently provokes a fight. What follows is one of the film's most entertaining sequences, as Lee moves through the pool hall with extraordinary speed and precision, using everything around him as both a weapon and a shield while Carter mostly tries to stay out of the way and contribute what he can. It is the first time Carter gets a real demonstration of just how capable his new partner actually is, and even Carter, who is not easily impressed, cannot help being slightly awed. As the two men continue working together, they begin to develop a grudging respect for each other. Carter starts to understand that Lee is not just some foreign officer out of his depth. He is a genuinely brilliant detective with exceptional physical skills and an absolute commitment to the mission. Lee, in turn, starts to understand that beneath Carter's bravado and self-promotion, there is actually a good and capable man who cares about doing the right thing, even if his methods are chaotic. The investigation leads them in the direction of the Chinese consulate and the criminal underworld that operates at the edges of Los Angeles's Chinese community. They follow a trail of clues that point them toward the network that Huntao has established in the city, a sophisticated operation that has been running for some time right under the noses of both the LAPD and the FBI. Lee's background knowledge of Huntao's methods and Sang's tactics proves invaluable in piecing together how the kidnapping was organized and where Soo-young might be held. During their investigation, Carter begins to understand the deeper personal stakes of the case for Lee. This is not just a professional assignment for the Hong Kong detective. Soo-young is like family. The friendship between Lee and Consul Han runs deep, and the thought of that little girl being in the hands of dangerous criminals is something that drives Lee with an intensity that goes far beyond duty. Carter, who initially saw this entire situation as an annoying interruption to his career, begins to genuinely care about the outcome. He has been around Lee long enough to be affected by that quiet, focused sense of purpose. The FBI, meanwhile, is conducting its own investigation and has established contact with the kidnappers. Ransom negotiations are underway, but the situation is complicated and fragile. Agent Russ is managing a delicate operation, and the last thing he wants is Carter and Lee charging in and disrupting everything with their unorthodox methods. He warns them off repeatedly, but both Carter and Lee are now too invested in the case to simply step aside. A major breakthrough comes when Carter uses his street connections to identify a possible location connected to the kidnapping network. The two of them follow this lead and find themselves getting closer to Sang's operation. There are dangerous encounters along the way, moments where both Lee and Carter are in genuine physical peril, and these shared dangers do more to bond them than any amount of time spent together in ordinary circumstances would have. When you have been in a fight side by side with someone, when you have trusted that person with your life and had that trust honored, something changes in the relationship. As the investigation deepens, a shocking revelation begins to emerge. The evidence that Lee and Carter are piecing together starts pointing toward a truth that is almost unbelievable. Hun Tao, the mysterious and unseen crime lord who has been orchestrating everything from the beginning, is not some anonymous figure operating from a hidden location. He is someone who has been hiding in plain sight, a person with a public identity and a position of apparent respectability that has allowed him to operate without suspicion. When the true identity of Hun Tao is finally revealed, it connects directly to the world of diplomacy and international affairs that Consul Han inhabits, and it explains how the kidnapping was able to be planned and executed with such precision and inside knowledge. The villain is revealed to be Thomas Griffin, the British commander who was present at the farewell dinner in Hong Kong at the very beginning of the story. Griffin has been using his respectable public position as a cover for his criminal empire, and the stolen Chinese artifacts that Lee recovered in Hong Kong were intended to be used as currency for the ransom demand. The plan was breathtaking in its cynicism. Griffin, operating as Hun Tao, intended to collect $50 million in ransom using the very treasures that Lee thought he had successfully recovered and secured. The artifacts had been moved again, and they were now at the center of a high-profile charity auction that Griffin was hosting at a grand venue in Los Angeles, using the event as the perfect cover for the ransom exchange. The climax of the film takes place at this auction. Lee and Carter infiltrate the event, moving through the crowd of wealthy and influential guests, as the tension builds toward a breaking point. Carter eventually confronts Tseng in a brutal and hard-fought battle that takes everything he has. Tseng is a dangerous and skilled fighter, and Carter is pushed to his absolute limits. But Carter is tougher than anyone has given him credit for, including himself, and he does not quit. Lee pursues Griffin through the venue as the situation erupts into chaos. The fight takes them high above the floor of the building, to a precarious and dangerous position where the stakes could not be higher. Su Young is in danger, and Lee knows that if he fails here, he fails the Han family, fails his oldest friend, and fails the little girl he has cared about for years. With everything on the line, Lee battles Griffin in a confrontation that is both physically spectacular and emotionally intense. In the end, Griffin falls, and his criminal empire collapses with him. Su Young is rescued. She is safe and unharmed, and when Consul Han is reunited with his daughter, the relief and joy of that moment is genuinely moving. Lee has fulfilled the promise he made when he stepped off that plane in Los Angeles, the unspoken but absolute promise that he would not rest until Su Young was safe. In the aftermath of everything, Lee and Carter stand together, no longer reluctant partners forced on each other by circumstance but genuine friends who have earned each other's respect through everything they have been through together. Carter has proven himself far more capable and far more loyal than anyone at the LAPD or the FBI gave him credit for. Lee has shown a side of himself that few people get to see, not just a disciplined and brilliant detective, but a man capable of deep loyalty and fierce love for the people he considers family. The film ends on a note of warmth and humor that perfectly captures the spirit of everything that came before it. Lee and Carter have found in each other something that neither of them expected. Two men from completely different worlds, with completely different styles and personalities and ways of seeing things, have discovered that sometimes the person least like you is the person who brings out the best in you. That is the heart of Rush Hour, and it is why the story continues to resonate with audiences all over the world more than 2 decades after it was first told. Rush Hour, 1998, Actor's Life History in Full Detail. Jackie Chan. Jackie Chan is one of the most remarkable human beings to have ever worked in the entertainment industry. His life story is not just the story of a movie star. It is the story of a person who climbed out of genuine poverty and hardship through an almost incomprehensible combination of physical talent, relentless hard work, and an absolute refusal to give up no matter how difficult things became. To understand who Jackie Chan is, you have to go back to the very beginning, to a small hospital in Victoria Peak, Hong Kong, on April 7, 1954. He was born Chan Kong Sang, which translates roughly to mean born in Hong Kong. His parents, Charles and Li Chan, were mainland Chinese who had fled to Hong Kong following the Chinese Civil War. The family was extraordinarily poor. His father worked as a cook for the French ambassador, and the financial pressures on the family were so severe that his parents seriously considered selling him at birth to a British couple, a doctor and his wife who had fallen in love with the baby and wanted to adopt him. His parents ultimately could not go through with it, but the fact that this situation even arose tells you everything about the desperate circumstances into which Jackie Chan entered the world. When Jackie was 7 years old, his parents moved to Australia, where his father had found work. Unable to take Jackie with them at first, they enrolled him in the China Drama Academy in Hong Kong, a rigorous and intensely demanding school for traditional Chinese opera performance. The school was run by a master named Yu Jim Yuan, and life there was unlike anything most people in the modern world can imagine. The students, all young children, trained for up to 19 hours a day. They learned acrobatics, martial arts, singing, dancing, and performance. The discipline was extraordinarily strict, and physical punishment was a regular part of the training regime. Jackie Chan lived and trained at this school for approximately 10 years, developing skills that would eventually make him one of the most physically gifted performers the world had ever seen, but doing so under conditions that could only be described as brutal. During his time at the China Drama Academy, Jackie was part of a performance group called the Seven Little Fortunes. Among his fellow students were Sammo Hung and Yuan Biao, two men who would go on to become major stars in their own right, and who would remain lifelong friends and collaborators with Jackie. The bond forged between these young performers during those incredibly demanding years of training was deep and lasting. When Jackie left the academy as a teenager, he entered the Hong Kong film industry as a stunt performer. The work was dangerous and the pay was minimal, but it was the only world he knew and he threw himself into it completely. He worked as a stuntman on productions throughout the early to mid-1970s, doing the kinds of dangerous physical work that other people refused to do. He suffered injuries. He got back up. He kept working. His early attempts to break through as a leading actor were not immediately successful. A film producer tried to market him as the next Bruce Lee following Lee's sudden and shocking death in 1973, and those early films failed to capture audiences. Jackie was not Bruce Lee and did not want to be. His natural personality was warm, comedic, and self-deprecating rather than intense and intimidating. He was a performer who made audiences laugh even as he amazed them with his physical abilities, and it took time for the industry to figure out how to properly use that quality. The real breakthrough came in the late 1970s with films like Snake in the Eagle's Shadow and Drunken Master, both released in 1978. These films combined martial arts action with genuine comedy in a way that felt completely fresh and original. Jackie's character in these films was not an invincible hero but rather a young, imperfect, sometimes foolish person who triumphed through determination and creativity rather than effortless superiority. Audiences responded to this with enormous enthusiasm, and Jackie Chan became a major star in Asia almost overnight. Throughout the 1980s, Jackie Chan produced some of the most extraordinary action films ever made. He wrote, directed, produced, and starred in films that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible on screen. He performed stunts that no insurance company would sanction and no rational person would attempt. He has broken his nose multiple times, dislocated his cheekbones, broken his fingers, toes, and ribs on countless occasions, cracked his skull during a stunt gone wrong in Yugoslavia, and suffered a serious spinal injury. He has been burned, cut, and beaten up in the service of creating cinematic moments that left audiences around the world speechless with amazement. A sequence of bloopers shown at the end of his films, showing the accidents and injuries sustained during production, became one of his most recognizable trademarks and gave audiences a visceral understanding of the real cost of what they were watching. Films like Project A, Police Story, Armor of God, and Miracles cemented his reputation in Asia as something beyond a movie star. He was a phenomenon, a performer of almost mythological status who combined the athleticism of an Olympic gymnast with the comic timing of a great comedian and the directorial vision of a serious filmmaker. In Hong Kong, he was not just famous. He was beloved in a way that very few entertainers anywhere in the world ever achieve. His attempts to break into the American market were long and complicated. He made several Hollywood films in the 1980s that did not connect with mainstream American audiences in the way his Asian films did. The Cannonball Run in 1981 gave him exposure but not the platform he needed. The 1980 film The Big Brawl was similarly unsuccessful in launching him as a Hollywood star. The American market simply did not know what to do with him, and the productions he was involved in did not understand how to properly showcase what made him special. The American breakthrough finally came with Rumble in the Bronx in 1995, which was shot in Vancouver but set in New York City and given a wide American release. American audiences responded to it with the kind of enthusiasm that Jackie Chan fans in Asia had been feeling for years, and suddenly Hollywood was very interested in finding the right vehicle for him. That vehicle turned out to be Rush Hour, and the rest is history. Off-screen, Jackie Chan has been a deeply complex and at times controversial figure. He has been married to Taiwanese actress Joan Lin since 1982, and they have a son together named J.C. Chan. However, Jackie has publicly admitted to infidelities during his marriage, including a relationship with actress Elaine Ng-Ile that resulted in a daughter named Etta Ng. His relationship with his son JC has been publicly troubled, including a period during which JC was arrested in China on drug-related charges and served time in prison. Jackie Chan has also been an extraordinarily active philanthropist for many decades. He established the Jackie Chan Charitable Foundation in Hong Kong in 1988, which provides scholarships and support for students in need. He has supported disaster relief efforts around the world, contributed to UNICEF campaigns, and used his fame and resources to draw attention to causes involving children's welfare, environmental protection, and disaster recovery. He was named a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador and has received numerous humanitarian awards recognizing his charitable work. In terms of his artistic output, Jackie Chan has appeared in well over 150 films across his career, spanning more than 5 decades. He has received an honorary Academy Award, recognizing his extraordinary contributions to cinema. He has been recognized as one of the most recognizable celebrities on Earth, with a global fan base that stretches across every continent. He is also a singer with a serious recording career, primarily in the Cantonese and Mandarin markets, where his albums have sold in enormous numbers. He is a man who came from nothing, who was trained under conditions that would break most people, who fought for decades to achieve recognition in the world's most competitive entertainment market, and who ultimately conquered it on his own terms, without becoming anyone other than himself. Chris Tucker. Chris Tucker is one of the most naturally gifted comedic performers of his generation, a man whose combination of vocal range, physical expressiveness, and instinctive comedic timing set him apart from virtually every other comedian working in Hollywood during the 1990s. His rise to fame is a story of extraordinary natural talent meeting the right opportunities at exactly the right moment, and it resulted in one of the most distinctive comic presences that American cinema has ever produced. Chris Tucker was born on August 31, 1971, in Atlanta, Georgia. He grew up in the Decatur area of Atlanta, the youngest of 6 children born to Mary Louise and Norris Tucker. His father ran a janitorial services business, and the family was a working-class household with deep roots in their community and strong connections to their church. Chris grew up in an environment shaped by Southern African American culture, with gospel music, community bonds, and a strong sense of family forming the backdrop of his childhood. From an extremely early age, it was clear that Chris Tucker was not like other children in terms of his natural gifts for performance and mimicry. He had an almost supernatural ability to observe people and reproduce their speech patterns, mannerisms, and personalities in a comedic way. He would imitate teachers, neighbors, television personalities, and family members, and he was so good at it that he could hold an entire room's attention without any formal training or preparation. His family recognized this gift early, and while some parents might have tried to suppress such a hyperactive and attention-seeking child, the Tucker family allowed Chris to be himself. He attended Columbia High School in Decatur, where he continued developing his comedic instincts in the most informal way possible, simply by being around people and making them laugh. After finishing high school, Tucker made a decision that was bold for a young man from a working-class background with no established connections in the entertainment industry. He decided to move to Los Angeles and pursue stand-up comedy professionally. This was not a decision made with any safety net or backup plan. He was betting everything on his belief in his own ability, and he was doing it in the most competitive entertainment market on earth. Tucker began performing at comedy clubs in Los Angeles, working his way onto stages wherever he could get time. The stand-up comedy circuit in Los Angeles in the late 1980s and early 1990s was an incredibly vibrant and competitive scene, and breaking through required not just talent but also resilience, persistence, and the ability to develop a distinctive voice that made you immediately recognizable. Tucker had all of these things. His high-pitched voice, which he could modulate into an extraordinary range of characters and emotional registers, was instantly distinctive. His physical comedy, which involved his entire body in every moment of performance, was electric. And his natural confidence on stage, the sense that he was completely comfortable and in his element in front of an audience, made him compelling to watch even before he said a single word. His big break in terms of national exposure came through the iconic HBO stand-up showcase Def Comedy Jam, which was one of the most important platforms for African American comedic talent during that era. Appearing on Def Comedy Jam brought Tucker to a national audience for the first time and began building the fan base that would eventually translate into Hollywood success. Industry insiders started paying attention. People in the film and television business recognized that Tucker had something genuinely special, a quality of spontaneous, high-energy comedic performance that was very difficult to manufacture or teach. His film career began in the early 1990s with smaller roles that allowed him to get a feel for performing in front of a camera rather than a live audience. The transition from stand-up to film acting is not always smooth, because the energy and scale of stand-up performance does not automatically translate to the more contained and precise demands of screen acting. But Tucker adapted with impressive speed. His natural instincts for character and reaction, honed through years of observational comedy, served him well in front of the camera. The role that truly launched his film career was in the 1995 cult classic Friday, directed by F. Gary Gray and written by and starring Ice Cube. Tucker played Smokey, a fast-talking, weed-smoking neighborhood character who became one of the most beloved and quoted figures in 1990s American comedy cinema. His performance in Friday was a revelation. Smokey was funny in a way that felt completely natural and unforced, as though Tucker was not performing at all but simply being himself in an extreme version of a recognizable world. The film became a massive hit on video and cable after a modest theatrical run and gave Tucker enormous credibility as a comedic performer with genuine screen presence. He followed Friday with a role in the action comedy Dead Presidents in 1995, and then appeared alongside Charlie Sheen in Money Talks in 1997, which was directed by Brett Ratner. That collaboration with Ratner was the direct connection that led to his casting in Rush Hour. Ratner had seen what Tucker could do on screen and knew immediately that the chemistry between Tucker's explosive verbal energy and Jackie Chan's physical precision could be something extraordinary. He was right. Rush Hour transformed Chris Tucker from a rising comedic talent into one of the biggest movie stars in the world practically overnight. The film's massive success made Tucker one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood, and for Rush Hour 2 in 2001, he reportedly received a salary of around $20 million, making him one of the highest-paid performers in the history of Hollywood at that point. For Rush Hour 3 in 2007, that number rose even higher to an estimated $25 million. These were extraordinary figures that reflected just how valuable his presence in those films was considered to be. However, Tucker's career outside of the Rush Hour franchise was notably sparse. He was famously selective about his roles, turning down projects that conflicted with his personal values, particularly his deeply held Christian faith, which became increasingly central to his life as he grew older. He stepped away from the kind of raunchy comedy that characterized some of his earlier work and became more careful about the projects he attached himself to. This selectiveness, combined with the enormous gap between Rush Hour films, meant that years could pass between his screen appearances. Tucker has spoken openly about his Christian faith in numerous interviews, describing how his relationship with God shapes his choices both professionally and personally. He has been close friends with several prominent figures in the Christian community, and has spoken at religious events and gatherings. This spiritual dimension of his life is not something he keeps separate from his public persona. It is central to who he is. Outside of acting, Tucker has been involved in philanthropic work that reflects his values. He has worked with African nations on humanitarian projects and has met with political leaders on the continent during visits focused on health and community development initiatives. He has been particularly interested in issues affecting communities in Africa and has used his platform and resources to draw attention to those issues. Tucker went through significant financial difficulties in the late 2000s and early 2010s, reportedly owing substantial amounts in back taxes, a situation that received considerable media coverage. He worked through those challenges and has spoken about the lessons learned from that period of his life, particularly regarding financial management and the responsibilities that come with sudden extraordinary wealth. His stand-up career has continued alongside his film work, and his 2015 Netflix comedy special was welcomed by fans who had missed seeing him perform. He remains a genuinely beloved figure in American comedy and entertainment, a performer whose unique voice and energy have never been replicated by anyone else, because what Tucker does comes from a place so personal and instinctive that it is simply not possible to imitate. Tom Wilkinson. Tom Wilkinson played the film's villain, the sophisticated and coldly menacing Griffin, who is secretly the crime lord Huntao. Wilkinson was born on February 5, 1948, in Leeds, Yorkshire, England. His early life was marked by a period of significant travel and cultural exposure when his family moved to Canada during his childhood, an experience that gave him a broader perspective on the world than many of his British contemporaries. He returned to England and pursued his education with seriousness, eventually studying at the University of Kent before training at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, one of the most prestigious drama schools in the world. Wilkinson's career was built primarily on the stage throughout the 1970s and 1980s, where he developed exceptional craft and discipline as a classical actor. His stage work gave him a technical foundation that made him extraordinarily versatile, capable of playing everything from Shakespeare to contemporary drama with equal conviction and depth. He brought that same depth to his screen work when film and television roles began to come his way in greater numbers during the 1990s. He became genuinely famous to international audiences through his extraordinary performance in The Full Monty in 1997, the year before Rush Hour, playing Gerald, a foreman who has lost his job and hides this humiliation from his wife while organizing a male striptease group. It was a performance of remarkable emotional intelligence and subtle comic timing that won him enormous critical praise and introduced his talents to a worldwide audience. Tom Wilkinson went on to receive Academy Award nominations for his work in the Bedroom in 2001 and Michael Clayton in 2007, cementing his reputation as one of the finest screen actors of his generation. He appeared in a remarkable range of productions throughout his career, from big-budget Hollywood films to intimate British dramas, always bringing the same level of commitment and intelligence to every role. He passed away in December 2023, leaving behind a body of work that stands as one of the finest in British acting history. Chris Penn. Chris Penn played Clive, the criminal contact who appears in the early scenes of Rush Hour. Penn was born on October 10, 1965, in Los Angeles, California. He came from an extraordinarily talented family. His father, Leo Penn, was a director and actor, and his brother Sean Penn became one of the most acclaimed and celebrated actors of his generation. Growing up surrounded by the film industry gave Chris Penn an early exposure to the craft of acting and a foundation from which to launch his own career. Chris Penn was a genuinely gifted character actor whose physical presence and naturalistic performing style made him memorable in whatever role he took on. He appeared in films like Footloose in 1984, Reservoir Dogs in 1992, where his performance as Nice Guy Eddie brought him considerable critical attention, and Short Cuts in 1993, directed by Robert Altman, which earned him a Spirit Award. He was never as famous as his brother Sean, but within the acting community he was deeply respected as a performer of real ability and honesty. Chris Penn passed away in January 2006 at the age of 40, leaving behind a body of work that stands as a testament to genuine and underappreciated talent. Elizabeth Pena. Elizabeth Pena played Detective Johnson in Rush Hour, Carter's partner at the LAPD. She was born on September 23, 1959, in Elizabeth, New Jersey, to Cuban parents who were both involved in the arts. Her father was a theatrical producer and her mother was an actress, so Elizabeth grew up in a household where performance and storytelling were central to daily life. The family moved to New York and later to Miami and Cuba before settling in the United States permanently. Pena began her acting career in the New York theater scene before transitioning to film and television. She built a strong and varied career over several decades, appearing in films like La Bamba in 1987, Batteries Not Included in 1987, and Jacob's Ladder in 1990, among many others. On television, she was perhaps best known to mainstream American audiences for her role in the series Modern Family in the later years of her career. She was consistently praised for bringing warmth, intelligence, and depth to roles that might have been written as simple supporting characters, and she was a respected presence in both Latino and mainstream American entertainment circles. Elizabeth Pena passed away in October 2014 at the age of 55, mourned by colleagues and fans who recognized how much genuine talent and heart she had brought to everything she did throughout her career. Tsai Ma. Si Ma played Consul Solon Han, the Chinese diplomat whose daughter's kidnapping sets the entire story in motion. Ma was born in Hong Kong and moved to the United States as a young man, building his career in American film and television while maintaining strong connections to his Chinese cultural roots. He studied acting and worked his way through the American entertainment industry during a period when opportunities for Asian American performers in Hollywood were extremely limited, which made his persistence and success all the more remarkable. Tsai Ma has appeared in an enormous range of productions over a career spanning several decades, including major Hollywood films like Arrival, The Farewell, and Milan, as well as numerous television series. He has become one of the most respected and recognizable Asian American character actors in the American entertainment industry, and in recent years has received increasing recognition for his contribution to expanding the representation of Asian American stories and perspectives in mainstream film and television. His performance in The Farewell in 2019 was particularly praised and brought him a new level of critical attention late in a career that had always been marked by quiet excellence. Rush Hour, 1998, budget, making of, and funny moments on set. The budget and production funding. Rush Hour was made on a budget of approximately $33 million, which in the context of 1998 Hollywood was considered a mid-range budget for an action comedy of this scale. It was not a small independent film by any means, but it was also not the kind of enormous blockbuster budget that studios typically reserved for their biggest tentpole releases. New Line Cinema made a calculated and confident bet when they committed to that budget and that start date, and the return on that investment turned out to be one of the most impressive in the studio's history. When you consider that the film ultimately earned approximately $245 million worldwide against that $33 million production budget, the financial success of Rush Hour was nothing short of extraordinary. The profit margin was exceptional and validated every decision that New Line Cinema had made in backing the project when Disney had walked away from it out of concern that the budget was too high and that Jackie Chan's appeal to American audiences was unproven. Disney's hesitation turned out to be one of the most costly miscalculations in the studio's history, while New Line's confidence turned out to be one of the best decisions they ever made. The bulk of the budget went towards several key areas. Jackie Chan's salary was a significant portion of the production costs, as he was already a globally recognized star bringing enormous value to the project even if American audiences had not fully discovered him yet. Chris Tucker's fee, while not yet at the astronomical levels it would reach for the sequels, was also a meaningful expense for the production. The stunt coordination and safety infrastructure required for Jackie Chan's physical sequences represented a considerable investment as well, because Chan's approach to action filmmaking demands an extraordinary level of preparation, rehearsal, and specialized technical support. The film was shot primarily in Los Angeles, which meant that the production had access to all the infrastructure and resources of the world's most developed filmmaking city. Shooting on location in the actual streets and neighborhoods of Los Angeles rather than building expensive sets helped manage costs in certain areas, though working in a living city always brings its own logistical complications and expenses. The Chinatown sequences were filmed at real locations, including the Fu Chow restaurant, which became one of the film's most recognizable settings and which still proudly advertises its connection to the movie to this day. Brett Ratner, as director, was known for working efficiently and moving quickly through production days, which helped keep the schedule on track and prevented the kind of budget overruns that can derail a production when a director loses control of the shooting pace. Ratner had a clear vision for what he wanted the film to be and communicated that vision effectively to his crew, which is one of the most important factors in keeping a production running smoothly and within financial parameters. The marketing campaign for Rush Hour also represented a significant investment beyond the production budget itself. New Line Cinema understood that they had something special on their hands and invested heavily in getting the word out before the film's September 1998 release. The trailers were cut brilliantly to showcase the chemistry between Chan and Tucker and the spectacular nature of the action sequences, and the campaign generated exactly the kind of pre-release excitement that translates into strong opening weekend numbers. The making of the film. The making of Rush Hour was a genuinely complex and fascinating process, shaped enormously by the unique circumstances of bringing together a Hong Kong action filmmaking legend with the very different conventions and working methods of Hollywood production. Jackie Chan had spent his entire career in Hong Kong, where he enjoyed complete creative control over his films. He wrote, directed, choreographed, and produced his own work, making every decision from the script level all the way down to the specific angle of a camera shot. Coming to Hollywood meant operating within a system that worked very differently, one where directors made the creative decisions, where studio executives had approval over major choices, and where the star of the film was expected to perform his role rather than control the entire production. This was a significant adjustment for Jackie Chan, and by his own admission it was not always a comfortable one. Chan has said openly in interviews that he did not particularly enjoy making Rush Hour, not because of the people involved but because of the fundamental difference in filmmaking philosophy. In Hong Kong, if Chan wanted to try a stunt a different way, or if he wanted to add a new piece of action to a scene, he simply did it. In Hollywood, every change required discussion, approval, and coordination with multiple departments and executives. That process felt slow and creatively restrictive to a man who was used to making 50 decisions before lunch. Chan also expressed dissatisfaction with the quality of the action sequences in the film compared to what he was capable of in his Hong Kong productions. He felt that the Hollywood system was overly cautious and that the action he was asked to perform was significantly tamer than what his fans around the world had come to expect from him. He famously said that if you had seen his Hong Kong movies, you would know that he could deliver 10 minutes of extraordinary fighting and stunt work in a single sequence. Rush Hour gave him moments of genuine brilliance but within constraints that he found frustrating. The language barrier between Chan and Tucker was a real challenge during production. Chan's English, while functional, was accented and sometimes difficult for Tucker to follow at speed, and Tucker's rapid-fire, slang-heavy American speech was genuinely hard for Chan to track in real time. Brett Ratner actually used this real-life communication gap creatively within the film itself, recognizing that the authentic confusion between the two actors could translate into some of the most naturally funny moments on screen. What you see in the film when Lee and Carter struggle to understand each other is not entirely manufactured. There was genuine bewilderment happening between the two performers at times, and Ratner was smart enough to capture it. The stunt coordination for the film was handled by Jackie Chan's own stunt team, the Jackie Chan Stunt Team, which he had built and trained over many years and which he trusted completely. Several members of the stunt team also appeared in the film as Huntao's henchmen, which was a common practice in Chan's productions where the stunt performers doubled as background characters and minor antagonists. The preparation for each physical sequence was meticulous, with Chan himself designing and planning the choreography of the action in close collaboration with his team. One of the most discussed aspects of the making of the film was Jackie Chan's discomfort with the script's comedy. Chan's humor in his Hong Kong films emerged almost entirely from physical situations, from the creative and inventive ways in which he used his body and his environment to generate laughs. The humor in Rush Hour, by contrast, was heavily verbal and relied on Chris Tucker's performance and delivery rather than physical comedy in the Chan tradition. Chan was not always comfortable with this approach and was sometimes uncertain how to react to Tucker's improvisational verbal explosions in a way that felt natural and funny rather than stiff and confused. Tucker, on the other hand, was extraordinarily comfortable with verbal improvisation and frequently went off script in ways that were inspired and hilarious. His natural instincts in front of the camera were so strong that Ratner often let him run with an improvised riff even if it was not in the script, because the results were frequently funnier than what was written. This improvisational quality gave many of Tucker's scenes an energy and spontaneity that script-bound performances simply cannot replicate. Funny and memorable moments on set. The behind-the-scenes atmosphere on the set of Rush Hour was by all accounts frequently hilarious, largely because of the genuine personality differences between Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker that produced comedy even when the cameras were not rolling. One of the most talked about running situations on set was the communication dynamic between Chan and Tucker off-camera. Tucker talks at an extraordinary speed under normal circumstances, but on set when he was energized and in his element, he would speak so rapidly, and with such a thick Atlanta accent and such heavy use of contemporary African-American slang that Jackie Chan had essentially no idea what he was saying at any given moment. Chan would stand listening to Tucker deliver a rapid-fire monologue, nod politely, and then quietly admit to someone nearby that he had not understood a single word. The crew found this endlessly amusing, and Tucker apparently found it even funnier that Chan would nod along so agreeably to things he genuinely could not comprehend. Tucker, for his part, found Jackie Chan's approach to preparation genuinely baffling and fascinating in equal measure. Tucker was accustomed to arriving on set and working through scenes with a combination of preparation and spontaneous inspiration. Chan arrived on set having already physically rehearsed every single movement of every action sequence to an almost microscopic level of precision. Chan knew exactly where every limb would be at every moment during a stunt sequence, and he expected the same level of precision from everyone around him. Tucker, watching Chan and his stunt team run through action choreography with the exactness of a military operation, reportedly found the contrast with his own freewheeling approach to comedy genuinely hilarious. There were numerous moments during production where Tucker would attempt to involve Chan in improvisational comedy bits between takes, launching into character riffs or jokes, and Chan would respond with polite confusion. Chan's sense of humor is very much rooted in physical expression rather than verbal sparring, and the cultural gap between his comedic instincts and Tucker's meant that there were plenty of moments where Tucker would deliver what he considered his best material and Chan would respond with a bemused smile that said everything about how much of it he had actually processed. Jackie Chan's relationship with the Hollywood filmmaking system also produced some genuinely funny moments from the crew's perspective. Chan was accustomed to filming action sequences by simply doing them, adjusting in real time, and trying different approaches until something felt exactly right, regardless of how long it took or how many attempts were required. Hollywood production works on strict schedules where every hour of filming time costs money and first assistant directors track every minute with an almost obsessive attention to the clock. The collision between Chan's instinct to keep trying until perfection was achieved and the Hollywood system's pressure to move on to the next shot was a source of constant gentle tension that the crew found both admirable and faintly comic. The blooper reel that plays over the end credits of Rush Hour, which became one of the most beloved elements of the film for audiences, gives a genuine window into the lighter moments of production. Watching Jackie Chan attempt difficult physical gags that do not go according to plan, or seeing Tucker crack himself up in the middle of a take, or observing the two of them dissolve into laughter together when something unexpected happens, captures something real about the atmosphere on set. These were not manufactured moments of manufactured fun. They were genuine accidents and genuine reactions, and they revealed that despite the communication challenges and the creative differences, there was real warmth and genuine affection developing between the two leading men as production progressed. Tucker reportedly loved watching Chan work with his stunt team and would often position himself nearby during the planning and rehearsal of stunt sequences simply to watch the process. He found the level of physical discipline and preparation that Chan brought to every single action moment genuinely inspiring, and it gave him a new appreciation for a kind of filmmaking craft that was completely outside his own experience. Chan, watching Tucker make an entire film crew lose control with laughter through a single improvised line reading, reportedly expressed a similar kind of admiration for a talent that was equally outside his own experience. One particularly well-documented funny moment during production involved the scene where Carter takes Lee to the pool hall. The choreography of the fight in that sequence required Tucker to be present in the middle of the action, while Chan and the stunt performers worked through the physicality of the scene. Tucker, who had no martial arts training whatsoever, had to navigate the choreography without getting in the way while simultaneously looking like he belonged in the chaos. The contrast between the precise, rehearsed movements of Chan and his team and Tucker's genuine attempts to look useful while basically trying not to get accidentally hit by something was a source of considerable amusement during filming. Brett Ratner has spoken in interviews about the unique challenge and privilege of directing the two men together. He described his job as essentially getting out of the way of something magical and making sure the camera was in the right place to capture it. Ratner understood that the chemistry between Chan and Tucker was something that could not be manufactured or forced. It either happened or it did not, and it happened almost immediately, even if either man would have predicted it in advance. The genuine bewilderment each felt toward the other's world created a real and authentic dynamic that the camera captured perfectly. The friendship that developed between Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker during the production of Rush Hour turned out to be one of the most genuine and lasting relationships to emerge from a Hollywood production in that era. The two men became real friends, not just professional collaborators, and that friendship has endured for decades beyond the making of the film. They reportedly got along so well personally that at one point they seriously discussed auditioning together for The Amazing Race Celebrity Edition, though that plan ultimately never materialized. But the fact that two men from such completely different backgrounds and worlds considered spending even more time together voluntarily says everything about the quality of the connection that was forged during those weeks of production in Los Angeles. The film they made together was not the easiest production in the world. There were language barriers, cultural differences, creative disagreements, and the inherent tension of two very different filmmaking traditions trying to coexist within a single Hollywood production. But all of those challenges were overcome by the talent of the people involved and by something that cannot be scripted or planned, which is the genuine, spontaneous, and completely authentic chemistry between two extraordinary performers who happen to bring out the very best in each other simply by being themselves. Rush Hour, 1998. Cultural and historical details. To truly understand what Rush Hour meant when it arrived in theaters in September of 1998, you have to understand the world that it was released into and the cultural forces that were shaping both Hollywood and global society at that particular moment in history. Rush Hour was not just a movie. It was a cultural event that arrived at a very specific intersection of East and West, of changing demographics in American society, of a Hollywood industry that was slowly and somewhat reluctantly beginning to grapple with questions of representation and diversity, and of a global entertainment marketplace that was becoming more connected and more complex than it had ever been before. All of these forces came together in this one film, and understanding them helps explain why Rush Hour hit the way it did, and why its impact extended so far beyond the simple pleasure of watching two funny and talented men run around Los Angeles solving a crime. The Hong Kong handover and its cultural weight. The film opens on one of the most historically significant days of the 20th century. July 1, 1997, the day that Great Britain officially returned sovereignty over Hong Kong to the People's Republic of China after 156 years of colonial rule. This was not a minor historical footnote. It was a moment that the entire world had been watching with a mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and genuine historical curiosity. The handover represented the end of the last significant chapter of the British Empire, and the beginning of a new and uncertain era for one of the most dynamic and economically vital cities on Earth. Hong Kong in 1997 was a city unlike any other place in the world. It had developed under British colonial governance into one of the great global financial centers, a place where East and West had been coexisting and colliding for generations. Its culture was a unique hybrid that blended Chinese tradition with British institutional influence, and a fiercely independent entrepreneurial spirit that was entirely its own. Hong Kong's cinema was one of the most creative and vital film industries anywhere in the world, producing action films, comedies, dramas, and martial arts pictures that had influenced filmmakers across Asia and around the globe. Jackie Chan was the supreme product of that culture, a performer who embodied everything that was distinctive and extraordinary about Hong Kong's approach to entertainment. By opening the film on the day of the handover and making Inspector Lee a Hong Kong police force detective whose world is about to change forever, the filmmakers grounded the story in a genuine and emotionally resonant historical moment. There was real anxiety in Hong Kong in 1997 about what the transition to Chinese sovereignty would mean for the city's unique freedoms, its legal system, its cultural identity, and its way of life. Lee's character, departing Hong Kong for Los Angeles in the immediate aftermath of this transition, carried the weight of that historical moment with him even if the film never addressed it directly in political terms. The opening establishes a character who belongs to a world that is itself in transition, and that gives him a quiet complexity that goes beyond the simple requirements of the buddy cop genre. The East meets West cultural dynamic. At the very heart of Rush Hour is one of the oldest and most enduringly fascinating cultural stories that human civilization has to tell, which is what happens when two very different worlds are forced to encounter each other and navigate their differences. Lee and Carter are not just two different people with two different personalities. They represent two fundamentally different cultural traditions, two different ways of understanding the world, two different sets of values and priorities and communication styles, and two different relationships to authority, hierarchy, and individual expression. Inspector Lee comes from a cultural background rooted in Confucian values that emphasize discipline, respect for hierarchy, collective responsibility, and the subordination of personal expression to the needs of the group and the requirements of duty. He does not boast about his abilities. He does not seek personal recognition or individual glory. He performs his duty with quiet excellence and expects others to do the same. His relationship with Consul Han is built on loyalty and mutual respect that transcends professional obligation. When he flies to Los Angeles to help find Su Yung, he is acting out of a sense of personal honor and familial loyalty that is deeply rooted in Chinese cultural values around friendship and obligation. Carter, on the other hand, is the product of a completely different cultural tradition. He is an African-American man from Los Angeles, shaped by a culture that celebrates individual expression, personal style, and vocal self-assertion. He is loud where Lee is quiet. He is improvisational where Lee is precise. He seeks personal recognition openly and without apology. He communicates through a rapid and highly stylized verbal performance that is itself a form of cultural expression, drawing on traditions of African American rhetorical style that have deep roots in both the church and the street. Carter does not understand why anyone would downplay their own abilities or defer when they could assert, and Lee genuinely cannot comprehend why anyone would expend so much energy on self-promotion when the work itself should speak. The cultural friction between these two men is not played for cheap laughs at anyone's expense. It is handled with genuine intelligence and affection for both traditions. The film never suggests that Lee's way is better than Carter's or that Carter's approach is superior to Lee's. Instead, it shows two genuinely capable men learning to recognize and appreciate qualities in each other that their own cultural backgrounds had not taught them to value. Lee teaches Carter something about discipline and quiet focus and the kind of deep loyalty that transcends convenience. Carter teaches Lee something about flexibility and individual expression and the value of trusting your instincts rather than always following the established protocol. By the end of the film, each man is slightly more complete than he was at the beginning, because he has been exposed to something genuinely different from himself and has been open enough to learn from it. Jackie Chan and the cultural bridge between Asia and Hollywood. The cultural significance of Jackie Chan's presence in Rush Hour cannot be overstated. By 1998, the relationship between Asian cinema and Hollywood was a complicated and often frustrating one from the Asian perspective. Bruce Lee had broken through in the early 1970s and demonstrated that an Asian star could command the attention of global audiences. But his death in 1973 had removed that bridge almost immediately after it was built. Throughout the late 1970s and the 1980s, Hollywood had largely continued to portray Asian characters through the lens of stereotype and caricature, either as mysterious exotic figures, dangerous villains, or comic sidekicks. The idea of an Asian man as the fully equal co-lead of a major Hollywood action film, rather than a sidekick or a supporting character, was genuinely radical in the context of what Hollywood had been producing. Jackie Chan's character Lee is never subordinate to Carter. He is never the butt of jokes about his cultural background in a mean-spirited way. He is portrayed as highly intelligent, extraordinarily capable, deeply honorable, and genuinely likable. He is confused by American culture in ways that are played for comedy, but so is Carter confused by Lee's world, and the comedy is always mutual and never directed at diminishing either man. This was a significant departure from how Hollywood had typically handled Asian characters in mainstream entertainment, and it mattered enormously to Asian audiences around the world who were accustomed to seeing people who looked like them portrayed in limiting and demeaning ways. The success of Rush Hour opened doors in Hollywood that had been stubbornly closed for decades. It demonstrated conclusively that American audiences were perfectly willing to embrace an Asian leading man and would turn up in enormous numbers to watch him. The film's financial success could not be argued with, and it shifted the conversation in Hollywood about the viability of Asian and Asian American talent in mainstream productions. This was a slow process, and Hollywood's response to Rush Hour's lesson was far less swift and decisive than it should have been, but the film was undeniably part of a broader cultural shift that has continued to develop in the decades since its release. African American representation and Chris Tucker's significance. Chris Tucker's presence in Rush Hour was equally significant from a cultural perspective. By the mid-1990s, African American talent was achieving unprecedented visibility in Hollywood, partly as a result of the cultural dominance of hip-hop music and its influence on mainstream American popular culture, and partly because a generation of African American filmmakers and performers had fought their way into the industry and were creating work that resonated with enormous audiences both within and beyond the African American community. Films like Boys in the Hood, Friday, Set It Off, and others had demonstrated that stories centered on African American characters and experiences could find massive audiences. Tucker's character Carter is a fully realized and complex African American man rather than a stereotype or a token. He is flawed, certainly, prone to ego and recklessness, but he is also genuinely funny, surprisingly capable, deeply loyal, and ultimately heroic. He is allowed to be the center of humor without being the object of ridicule. He is allowed to be wrong without being diminished. And he is placed on equal footing with his co-lead in a way that was meaningful to audiences who were accustomed to seeing black characters in supporting or subordinate roles in mainstream Hollywood films. The cultural vocabulary that Tucker brought to the role, the references, the musical sensibility, the verbal style, the physical expressiveness, all of it was rooted in a very specific and authentic African American cultural tradition. Carter's love of soul and R&B music, his pride in his personal style, his complex relationship with authority, his use of humor as both a shield and a weapon, these were not generic comedy beats but specific cultural details that gave the character genuine depth and authenticity. Hollywood in 1998 and the landscape of action comedy. The Hollywood of 1998 was a particular moment in the history of American cinema that is worth understanding to fully appreciate where Rush Hour fit within the larger cultural picture. The late 1990s were a period of enormous commercial ambition in Hollywood, with studios chasing ever larger budgets and ever more spectacular special effects following the unprecedented success of blockbusters like Titanic and Jurassic Park earlier in the decade. At the same time, there was a vibrant independent film scene that was producing some of the most creative and critically respected work in American cinema history. The buddy cop genre that Rush Hour belonged to had been established and popularized throughout the 1980s, primarily by the Lethal Weapon franchise beginning in 1987 and the Beverly Hills Cop series beginning in 1984. These films had demonstrated the commercial power of pairing two mismatched personalities and forcing them to work together through danger and comedy, and the formula had been replicated many times with varying degrees of success throughout the subsequent decade. By 1998, there was a legitimate question about whether this genre had anything genuinely new to offer audiences who had seen the template executed many times over. Rush Hour answered that question by doing something that none of the previous buddy cop films had done, which was to bring together two performers from genuinely different cultural worlds rather than simply different personality types within the same cultural framework. Lethal Weapon paired a crazy white cop with a cautious black cop. Beverly Hills Cop put a fast-talking black detective in a stuffy white environment. Rush Hour crossed a much wider cultural divide, bridging not just personal differences but genuine differences in language, tradition, history, and worldview. That distinction made the chemistry between Chan and Tucker feel genuinely fresh rather than like a variation on something audiences had already seen. The historical significance of Hong Kong's cinema crossing over. One of the most important cultural and historical dimensions of Rush Hour is its role in the story of Hong Kong's cinema's relationship with the rest of the world. Hong Kong had been producing extraordinary action films for decades, films that were hugely influential on action cinema globally even when they were not widely seen by mainstream Western audiences. Directors like John Woo, whose work would later influence Hollywood deeply, and performers like Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, and Yuen Biao had created a body of work that action cinema enthusiasts around the world treasured, but which existed largely outside the mainstream Hollywood distribution system. Throughout the 1990s, there was a significant wave of Hong Kong filmmaking talent moving into Hollywood or being recruited by Hollywood studios. John Woo directed Hard Target and Broken Arrow and Face Off. Chow Yun-fat appeared in The Replacement Killers and The Corruptor. Jet Li appeared in Lethal Weapon for the same year Rush Hour was released. The question of whether Hong Kong action cinema's distinctive approach to physical filmmaking could survive the transition to the Hollywood system, with its different working methods, its committee-driven decision-making, and its different relationship between the director and the star, was being answered through a series of experiments of which Rush Hour was the most commercially successful. Rush Hour demonstrated that the answer was yes, it could survive, but only partially and at some cost. Jackie Chan himself was never fully satisfied with what Hollywood allowed him to do, and he continued making Hong Kong productions throughout his Hollywood career that he considered more representative of his true capabilities. But for mainstream Western audiences who had not previously encountered Hong Kong action cinema, Rush Hour served as a spectacular introduction to what Jackie Chan could do and sent many of those audiences searching for his earlier work. In this way, the film functioned as a cultural gateway, opening Western eyes to a tradition of physical filmmaking that was among the most extraordinary in the history of cinema. The creation of Rotten Tomatoes and cultural impact on film criticism. Perhaps the most unexpected cultural legacy of Rush Hour is its connection to the creation of Rotten Tomatoes, which has become one of the most influential forces in how films are marketed, discussed, and consumed in the modern era. The website's founder built it specifically in anticipation of Rush Hour's release as a way of aggregating critical opinion about Jackie Chan's Hollywood crossover moment. The fact that one of the most powerful platforms in contemporary film culture owes its existence to this film is a remarkable and underappreciated piece of cinematic history. Rotten Tomatoes has fundamentally changed the relationship between film criticism and film consumption. The site's rating system, which reduces complex critical responses to a simple fresh or rotten binary, has been both celebrated for making critical opinion accessible to general audiences and criticized for oversimplifying the nuanced work of serious film criticism. Whether you consider its influence positive or negative, there is no question that it has reshaped the film industry in profound ways, affecting how studios market their films, how audiences make viewing decisions, and how filmmakers think about the relationship between critical reception and commercial performance. And all of that began with a fan's desire to collect reviews of Jackie Chan's work in anticipation of Rush Hour. The film's legacy in American pop culture. In the years since its release, Rush Hour has embedded itself deeply into American popular culture in ways that speak to how genuinely it connected with audiences across different backgrounds and demographics. Specific lines of dialogue from the film became part of everyday conversational vocabulary. The film's particular blend of action and comedy was referenced and parodied widely in subsequent years, which is always the mark of a work that has truly penetrated the cultural consciousness rather than simply passing through it. The friendship between Lee and Carter, and what that friendship represented culturally, resonated deeply with audiences who recognized in it something genuine and valuable. The idea that two people from vastly different worlds could find common ground, could learn from each other, could choose loyalty to each other over the comfortable familiarity of their own separate worlds, is a profoundly human story that transcends any particular cultural moment. It is why the film continues to find new audiences decades after its release, why young people who were not born when it came out discover it, and respond to it with the same enthusiasm that original audiences felt in 1998. Rush Hour arrived at a moment when American culture was grappling with questions about race, identity, representation, and the changing relationship between East and West in a globalizing world. It did not answer those questions explicitly or with any particular political agenda. It simply told a story about two men from different worlds who became friends and saved a little girl, and in doing so it touched something universal that made people all over the world feel that they recognized themselves somewhere in what they were watching. That is the deepest and most lasting cultural achievement of any work of popular art, and Rush Hour achieved it with style, humor, heart, and two of the most naturally gifted performers that the entertainment world has ever produced. When people talk about Rush Hour nearly 3 decades after its release, they do not just talk about the plot or the action sequences or even the performances in isolation. They talk about specific moments, specific images, specific lines, and specific cultural touchstones that lodge themselves so deeply into the collective memory of audiences around the world that they became part of the shared cultural language of an entire generation. These are the details that make Rush Hour not just a movie but an icon, and understanding them helps explain why this film continues to mean so much to so many people across so many different backgrounds and cultures. The "do you understand the words" moment. There is perhaps no single moment in Rush Hour more immediately recognizable to anyone who has seen the film than the scene where Carter, frustrated by his inability to communicate with Lee, leans in and delivers the line asking whether Lee understands the words coming out of his mouth. This moment has been quoted, referenced, parodied, memed, and replicated in popular culture so many times and across so many different contexts that it has taken on a life entirely independent of the film itself. It appears in internet culture constantly, decades after the film's release. People use it in everyday conversation. It has been referenced in other films and television shows. It has become a universal shorthand for the experience of communication breakdown between two people who are speaking the same language, but not actually understanding each other at all. What makes this moment so culturally powerful is that it captures something deeply recognizable about human experience. Everyone has been in a situation where they felt that the person they were trying to communicate with was simply not processing what they were saying, and Tucker's delivery of that line, with its combination of exasperation, confidence, and theatrical disbelief, hits that universal nerve with perfect precision. The fact that it is also genuinely very funny makes it the kind of moment that stays in the memory permanently. The musical moment with Edwin Starr. One of the most beloved and culturally resonant sequences in Rush Hour involves Carter attempting to get Lee to loosen up by playing Edwin Starr's classic soul anthem in the car. What follows is one of the great comedic moments in 1990s cinema. Carter is completely in his element, singing along with enormous enthusiasm and physical commitment, completely lost in the joy of the music. Lee, sitting in the passenger seat, is bewildered but gradually, almost involuntarily, begins to be drawn into the energy of the moment. This scene works on multiple cultural levels simultaneously. On the surface it is simply very funny, two men in a car having completely different relationships to a piece of music. But beneath that surface comedy, the scene is doing something culturally significant. Soul music of that era was a deeply specific cultural product, born out of the African American experience, and carrying within it a history of joy, pain, struggle, and celebration that was not immediately accessible to someone outside that cultural tradition. Carter's relationship to that music is not casual. It is personal and deep and expressive of something fundamental about who he is and where he comes from. Lee's gradual warming to it over the course of the scene is a small but meaningful moment of cross-cultural connection, a representation of how music can bridge distances between people that words and logic cannot cross. The scene also works because of what it reveals about Carter as a character. A man who can be that uninhibited and that joyful about a piece of music, that free in his own self-expression, is a man with genuine warmth at his core beneath all the bravado and self-promotion. It humanizes Carter in a way that nothing else in the film does quite as effectively. The Chinatown sequences and their cultural meaning. The film's use of Los Angeles's Chinatown as a primary setting carries significant cultural weight that goes beyond simple location scouting. Los Angeles Chinatown has a long and complex history as one of the oldest Chinese American communities in the United States, a place that represents generations of immigration, cultural preservation, discrimination overcome, and identity maintained in the face of enormous pressure to assimilate. By setting key sequences of the film in this environment, Rush Hour planted its story within a real and living piece of American cultural history. The contrast between Lee navigating Chinatown with ease and confidence while Carter is the outsider for once is a deliberate and culturally intelligent reversal of the dynamic that dominates the rest of the film. Throughout most of the story, Lee is the foreigner trying to find his footing in an American city. In Chinatown, those roles flip, and Carter experiences for the first time what it feels like to be in an environment where the cultural language is not his own. This reversal is never belabored or over-explained. It is simply shown, and audiences who are paying attention understand what it means without being told. The Fu Chow restaurant, a real establishment that still stands in Los Angeles Chinatown and still advertises its connection to the film, became one of the movie's most enduring real-world cultural legacies. The fact that a real community restaurant became a landmark associated with a Hollywood film says something genuine about how deeply Rush Hour embedded itself in the actual geography and culture of Los Angeles rather than simply using the city as a backdrop. The cultural significance of the equal partnership. One of the most important cultural details of Rush Hour, one that audiences may not consciously articulate but absolutely feel, is the complete equality of the partnership between Lee and Carter. Director Brett Ratner made a very deliberate decision early in the development of the film that neither man would be the sidekick. Neither man would be the straight man to the other's comedian. Neither man would be subordinate in terms of capability or screen presence or narrative importance. Both men would be fully realized leads with equal weight in the story. This decision was culturally radical in ways that are easy to underestimate from the perspective of the present. Hollywood in 1998 had very little precedent for a film in which an Asian man and a black man shared the lead of a major mainstream production on completely equal terms. The industry's default setting was still very much oriented toward white male leads, with performers of other backgrounds filling supporting roles or at best secondary lead positions. Rush Hour rejected that default completely and unapologetically, and audiences responded to that rejection with enormous enthusiasm. For Asian American audiences, seeing Jackie Chan's character treated as a fully capable and fully respected equal throughout the film was genuinely meaningful. For African American audiences, seeing Carter portrayed with complexity and genuine heroism rather than as a comic sidekick was equally significant. For audiences of all backgrounds, the simple pleasure of watching two fully realized and equally compelling characters navigate the world together was entertainment of the highest order. The cultural message embedded in that equality was received and appreciated even by viewers who could not have articulated exactly what they were responding to. The martial arts tradition meets American action cinema. Rush Hour represented a genuine and historically significant collision between two of the most important action filmmaking traditions in the world. On one side was the Hong Kong martial arts film tradition, which had developed over decades into one of the most sophisticated and physically demanding forms of cinematic action ever created. This tradition valued real physical ability above all else, demanded that performers actually possess the skills they were portraying on screen, and had developed a visual language for action choreography that was entirely its own. Jackie Chan was not just the greatest current practitioner of this tradition but one of its primary architects, a man who had pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible in front of a camera further than almost anyone in history. On the other side was the Hollywood action film tradition of the 1980s and 1990s, which relied more heavily on editing, camera work, and special effects to create the impression of action, and which generally used stunt performers to execute the most dangerous physical work rather than expecting actors to perform it themselves. This tradition had its own brilliance and had produced some genuinely spectacular entertainment, but it operated on fundamentally different principles from the Hong Kong approach. When these two traditions met in Rush Hour, the result was something that felt genuinely new to mainstream American audiences. Watching Jackie Chan perform his own stunts with the creativity and precision that he brought to the pool hall sequence, or the traffic sign leap, or the silk banner slide in the film's climax, American audiences who had grown up on Hollywood action films experienced a kind of physical cinema they had never quite encountered before. The authenticity of what Chan was doing, the knowledge that there was no camera trick and no stunt double and no special effect, gave these sequences a visceral quality and an energy that could not be manufactured by any other means. That authenticity introduced an entire generation of mainstream Western audiences to a tradition of action filmmaking that was among the richest and most extraordinary in cinema history. The cross-cultural humor and its universal appeal. One of the most culturally sophisticated things about Rush Hour is the way it handles cross-cultural humor. The film is full of comedy that arises from the differences between Lee and Carter, between Hong Kong and American culture, between Chinese and African American traditions, between Eastern and Western approaches to life. But at every point, the humor is directed at the situation rather than at either culture. Neither tradition is made to look foolish or inferior. The comedy comes from the genuine strangeness of encounter, from the universal human experience of encountering something completely outside your own frame of reference, and not knowing how to process it. This approach to cross-cultural comedy was genuinely unusual in mainstream Hollywood entertainment of that era. The more common approach was to use cultural difference as a source of humor at the expense of whichever culture was deemed the more foreign or exotic in the context of the film, which typically meant that non-American and non-white cultures bore the weight of the joke. Rush Hour refused this approach consistently. When the film found humor in the gap between Lee's world and Carter's world, both men were equally positioned as outsiders to each other's reality, and the audience laughed with both of them rather than at either of them. This inclusive quality of the film's comedy is one of the primary reasons for its extraordinary cross-cultural success. Rush Hour was a massive hit not just in North America but across Asia, in Europe, in Latin America, and in markets around the world. Audiences everywhere found something in it that they could relate to and laugh at, because the humor was rooted in universal human experiences of difference and misunderstanding rather than in jokes that only made sense from within a single cultural perspective. The fashion and style details of the era. Rush Hour is also a remarkably precise cultural document of a very specific moment in American fashion and style history. Carter's wardrobe, his Corvette, his attitude toward personal presentation, all of it is rooted in the aesthetic sensibility of late 1990s African American urban cool, a style that was enormously influential on mainstream American fashion throughout that decade and beyond. The oversized clothing, the particular color choices, the car culture represented by that black convertible Corvette with its chrome Dayton rims, these details were not random costume choices but precise representations of a cultural aesthetic that had enormous currency and significance in 1998. The reference embedded in Carter's car is itself a piece of cultural intelligence. The specific choice of a black Corvette convertible with chrome Dayton rims was a direct reference to a well-known hip-hop song, a piece of cultural shorthand that communicated volumes about Carter's identity, his aspirations, and his relationship to a particular tradition of African American cool to anyone who recognized the reference. For those who did not recognize it, the car simply looked cool. For those who did, it was a signal that the filmmakers understood and respected the cultural world they were drawing on. Lee's style, by contrast, was understated and functional in ways that reflected his Hong Kong police background and his Confucian-influenced sense of personal presentation. He did not dress to be seen. He dressed to move, to work, to perform his function effectively. The contrast between his practical and unassuming wardrobe and Carter's elaborately styled outfits was another visual expression of the cultural differences between the two men, differences that were communicated to audiences before a single word of dialogue was spoken. The film's impact on the representation of Asian culture in America. In the broader context of Asian representation in American popular culture, Rush Hour arrived at a moment when the Asian American community was increasingly vocal about the way Hollywood portrayed people of Asian heritage. The long history of stereotyping, caricature, and marginalization that had characterized Hollywood's treatment of Asian characters was being challenged by a generation of Asian American artists, activists, and audiences who demanded better. Rush Hour did not emerge directly from that community in the way that a film written and directed by Asian American filmmakers would have, but its cultural impact on questions of representation was nevertheless significant. Jackie Chan's character Lee was the kind of Asian male protagonist that Hollywood had almost never produced before. He was not a villain. He was not a mysterious exotic figure. He was not a comic relief character defined by accent jokes and cultural misunderstanding. He was not submissive, not emasculated, not defined by the white characters around him. He was the hero, fully and completely, a man of extraordinary capability and profound personal honor who drove the narrative as much as his American partner, and who was never diminished or subordinated by his foreignness. For Asian American audiences who had grown up watching Hollywood consistently fail them in terms of representation, Lee was a character of genuine cultural importance. The film's success also contributed to a broader cultural conversation about the global nature of the entertainment industry, and the question of whose stories deserve to be told at the center of mainstream films. Rush Hour demonstrated that a film led by an Asian man and a black man, set partly in Hong Kong and partly in the Chinese-American community of Los Angeles, telling a story rooted in the concerns and relationships of non-white characters, could be one of the most commercially successful films of its year. That demonstration was culturally important in ways that extended far beyond the film itself. The enduring cultural relevance. Nearly 3 decades after its release, Rush Hour remains culturally relevant in ways that few films of its era can claim. It continues to be discovered by new generations of viewers who find in it the same pleasure and warmth and genuine entertainment that original audiences experienced in 1998. Its cultural references have become embedded in the language of Internet culture, where specific moments and lines from the film circulate constantly as expressions of feeling and experience that transcend the original context of the movie. The film also continues to be relevant in the ongoing cultural conversation about representation in Hollywood, a conversation that has become more urgent and more visible in recent years than it was in 1998. Rush Hour looks different from the vantage point of the present than it did at the moment of its release. In retrospect, its commitment to equal and respectful treatment of its 2 lead characters and their respective cultural backgrounds appears even more deliberate and even more remarkable than it might have seemed at the time. In an era when the question of who gets to be the hero of a mainstream Hollywood film is being debated more openly than ever before, Rush Hour stands as an early and commercially triumphant argument for the answer that most people already know in their hearts, which is that anyone can be the hero and everyone deserves to see themselves reflected with dignity and power on the screen. Rush Hour is a film that knew what it was doing culturally even when it appeared to be simply having fun, and that combination of genuine entertainment and genuine cultural intelligence is the deepest reason why it has endured and why it continues to matter. If you enjoyed this cultural breakdown of Rush Hour, please hit the like button and share this video with someone who loves cinema and culture. subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.